Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 7 Not a Hero DLC, Professional difficulty, no damage, no save walkthrough. And this has to be the most intense thing I have ever done in a Resident Evil game by far. I must have spent months on this particular DLC just to get this restricted walkthrough done properly. You will not believe the amount of mistakes I have made trying to get this done. It's definitely a testament to how well designed this game is and how well designed this DLC is. Every single time I've had to restart this particular DLC has been my fault. It has never been the game's fault. And that is why I consider this to be legitimately difficult for all of the right reasons. And I'm very glad that I'm finally getting the chance to show this with you guys, especially when today is my birthday, so this is practically a birthday special for me. A game that I absolutely love. A game that I feel is the last true Resident Evil game. The fact that I'm taking the time to make this commentary right now for this DLC on my birthday is just such a special moment for me. This was an absolute blast to play. Every single time I had to restart this DLC, I did not feel down about myself. I was not feeling frustrated with the game. I was just feeling even more excited. It's pretty much the same feeling that I had when I was doing my walkthrough at the end of Zoe DLC with no damage, no effigies, and without using any kind of manual saves. Like, this game has easily the best DLCs out of any other Resident Evil game I played. The DLCs are hard, they take a lot of risks with changing up certain fundamental mechanics to make it feel different from the main experience, and all these together create some of the most memorable pieces of content ever in a Resident Evil game, and it pretty much shows Capcom for what it is. This is old Capcom. This is the old Capcom that I love compared to the new Capcom who made Resident Evil 2 Remake. A game that is honestly my least favorite Resident Evil game at this point because of the fact that Capcom just got very lazy and they just decided to twiddle their thumbs when it came to designing that game. They just did not go the extra mile with designing that game whatsoever. They took so many risks with Resident Evil 7 and they took no risks whatsoever with Resident Evil 2 Remake. And all of that together just made a very simplistic game that doesn't even feel like Resident Evil. And if you want to hear my thoughts about Resident Evil 2 Remake, check out my knife-only walkthroughs of Leon 1 and Claire 1, because I really talk a lot about my thoughts about Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I'm still going to continue with my thoughts on Resident Evil 2 Remake when I do my knife-only walkthroughs of Leon 2 and Claire 2. I haven't gotten started on them because I've been busy with other projects, especially when Resident Evil 3 Remake came out recently. And I did a walkthrough of Resident Evil 3 Remake, and I am planning on doing an updated walkthrough, because the strategies that I showcase in my walkthrough aren't the best, and I have been trying my best to prepare for a Resident Evil 3 Remake, no damage, no save attempt, that I just haven't had the time to devote to Resident Evil 2 Remake. I mean, I had the time to do this, however, because I was actually excited about doing this particular DLC, because I love this DLC to death. For a free DLC, they really went out. I can't believe that a free DLC like this is actually the hardest thing that I've ever done in a Resident Evil game. And the fact that it's free really says a lot about what old Capcom was all about back then. And then, what do we get with the Resident Evil 2 Remake DLCs? They made us pay for absolutely nothing. They made us pay for reskins of Fort Survivor. Like, what is that? That's a ripoff. It's so dumb. This isn't a ripoff. I'm willing to pay money for the End of Zoe DLC because that DLC is really difficult, and it felt like it was actually worth something because of the amount of time and dedication they devoted to that DLC. And I can't say the same with Resident Evil 2 Remix DLCs. All they do is just put new characters in old areas that we've already traversed, and then they just rearrange the enemy placements, and that's it. Nothing special whatsoever. And like I said, it's just the Fort Survivor reskin, where you're just going from point A to point B, not caring about anything. There's no replay value whatsoever once you actually figure out the true path you're supposed to take. And that's somehow an acceptable DLC in everyone's mind? Like, what is this? The people that like Resident Evil 2 Remake are fake Resident Evil players. I've said this so many times, and I'm just going to stop right there, because I don't want to mar this game's perfection by talking about Resident Evil 2 Remake. So for this area right here, we're going to be encountering the Mama Molded, and we don't have the ability to take her out just yet, so follow what I do over here. This will work every single time. So stand over here. The moment she roars, run all the way over here, because she's going to try to run at you. Get her to run into the nerve gas trap to stun her. Watch out for that nerve gas trap on the ground there. Hug the left-hand side, grab that grenade, grab the crank, and the Molded right behind me will kill itself every single time. And then you need to grab the gear over here, and there are also going to be a couple of grenades. And once you have the crank and the gear, we're going to be able to activate the mechanism that will allow us to gain access to the cell block key. And then once you finish this animation of turning the crank, the Mama Molded is going to attack you, and all you gotta do is just deflect her. And that is a new mechanic in this DLC. There is the ability to deflect attacks, and it's very strict on the timing. You have to press it the moment the attack is about to get to you, and I always sprint into the Mama Molded so that I'm afforded a lot more leniency when I'm supposed to press the button, because she's running towards me, and I'm running towards her, and since it's a context-sensitive deflection, where you press L1 at the right moment when an enemy is about to attack you, because I'm closing the distance to her very quickly, it's giving me that leniency that I need. It's the same case with Resident Evil 3 Remake's context-sensitive dodge, and it's the main reason why the dodge works better on Inferno difficulty when the enemies are way faster and they're a lot more aggressive. Because of the fact that the enemy attacks are faster on Inferno difficulty, the dodge detects very well compared to Hardcore difficulty. Although in Resident Evil 3 Remake's case, the dodge didn't really have as strict of timing because of the fact that the game was very broken, and because of the fact that a lot of the enemies were very broken on Resident Evil 3 Remake, they had to provide a little bit more leniency with the dodge timing. Whereas in this, the timing is so strict, and there isn't any kind of punish whatsoever for perfectly deflecting anyone. Whereas on Resident Evil 3 Remake, the enemies could attack you while you were dodging. The amount of times I have been grabbed by a Palehead, or the amount of times I've been grabbed by an Any-Alpha Parasite or from a normal zombie, whenever I've initiated the perfect dodge, is just bullcrap. And I have no idea what Capcom was thinking when they designed the dodge on that game, and also with the cross-punch and shove that Carlos has. But it's definitely clear that the team who designed Resident Evil 3 Remake was not the same team that made Resident Evil 7. And I don't know how they could go from a game that was as perfectly polished as Resident Evil 7 to broken games like Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake. But right here, we have just gained access to the high-grade filter, and fun fact about this scene, on the Korean version, I saw this on K-Hunk's channel, this whole entire scene is censored. So when you go down the elevator and you go over to where this soldier is, he's already dead. There's no kind of cutscene that plays. You can just immediately gain access to the high-grade filter. So if you're wanting to speedrun the Not a Hero DLC, play the Korean version, because you won't have to go through that particular cutscene. But now that we have the high-grade filter, we can gain access to this other area over here. And I'm going to be showcasing how to get past the white molded, also known as the fumers, on this game. And all you have to do when it comes to the fumers is just run past them. Unlike the normal molded, which have the sprint counter, and on this DLC, they have a new kind of sprint counter where they can immediately grab you as a sprint counter and just bite you. The fumers do not have any kind of sprint counter, so you are safe to run past them, and their attack is very slow, so it allows you to bypass them, and I'm really glad that it works like that. It is definitely something that's needed when it comes to this enemy, because you don't have the tools necessary to finish him off at the moment. And if it did have a sprint counter, it would be one of the most bullcrap enemies ever, because there's only one way to kill these white molded, and it's using the ramrods, also known as the rapid-acting mycetotoxic rounds. And we're about to gain access to the ramrods in a moment, once we get past these 3 white molded. And something I should also specify when it comes to the way the enemies spawn on this DLC. On the main game, you could cause the enemies to despawn if you reach particular thresholds of a room, or if you went inside of a safe room, and when you return back to that room, the enemies do not spawn immediately. They've changed that on this DLC. When you re-enter an area where there are enemies, they will spawn immediately to stop you from exploiting that mechanic. That mechanic was definitely needed in the main game, because you didn't have the capabilities necessary to take on so many enemies. Whereas in this DLC, and also in the End of Zoe DLC, you have the capabilities necessary to take on a lot of these enemies, so that's why they made it so that the enemies spawn in very quickly, to force you to either deal with them, or to find some alternative way of getting past them. And speaking of enemies, we're coming across a new enemy type right now, which is the Baby Molded. And the Baby Molded isn't too bad, but they're very dangerous in their higher numbers. So upon first spawning these guys by reaching this threshold over here, kill this guy because he always drops right there, and then counter this guy. You can also crouch under that jump attack if you crouch at the right moment and you move forward, but it's not really recommended, because getting rid of these enemies is the best way to deal with them, rather than just dodging them. And throw a grenade right there. You've got to prep a grenade the moment you go past that white mold on the left side of the wall. And then throw another incendiary grenade over here once you've hit the button. Don't quick turn, just turn around. It's way faster. And then this is where it's kind of random, because it's random as to whether you're going to get a lot of Baby Molded attacking you or not. These enemies are very quick to attack you. The moment one starts the animation, another one could be prepping their animation, and they make a very specific kind of sound effect when they start their animation. But countering them is very easy. You just gotta get the timing down. The jump attack works off a linear equation where time is always a constant, so regardless of your distance, they will always take the same amount of time to get close to you with that jump attack. And then right here, prep your Neuro Stun Grenade, but don't use it on this guy. Just run past him, because he will not have the sprint counter at all. And then, there are a bunch of these turrets over here, and you have to crouch in order to make sure they don't shoot you. I'm uncrouching and crouching in order to move a little bit faster. And then, use the Neuro Stun Grenade on that Fat Molded. You're going to need another Neuro Stun Grenade for these two Fast Molded coming up. And this is really cool right here, because there's going to be a moment where you can use a grenade to get rid of a bunch of turrets. And it's after you get rid of these Fast Molded over here. So these enemies are invulnerable during their spawning animation, so wait until they finish their spawn animation, and then throw the Neuro Stun Grenade. Now, throw a grenade, and then these turrets are going to be gone. There's going to be 2 additional turrets coming up, so just crouch and uncrouch if you want to move faster. You can choose to not use a grenade on those turrets and just take the long path to get more ammo, but it's not recommended because you're going to waste a lot more ammo, even though you will get a lot of ammo back in the process. But it's completely unnecessary. And now we are going to be moving on to the next area after we've obtained the night vision device. And while we're making our way over to this next area, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the mechanics, mainly with the animations. So you might have noticed with the first couple of molded in the DLC that I used a deflect, and then I also used the ability to punish their flinch animation with an animation by punching them. There are multiple different ways of putting the enemies into that animation so you can punish them with a melee attack. The first option is by shooting them, and on this DLC, every single shot will always make the enemy flinch. And every single flinch animation they get put into via shooting them will always lead to a melee attack. You can also deflect them, and that is another good option. And you can also dismember their limb, and compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, where the limb dismemberment system was very inconsistent, on this DLC, when you take off the arms of a molded using the knife, it will always take 3 knife hits in order to take off the limbs. So if you're not very confident in your ability to deflect the enemy attacks, you can use that as an option. Dodge the first attack, and then aim with your knife, and then stab the arms so that you can take it off, put them into that flinch animation, and then punch them. And right here, we're being introduced to a new enemy type, which is the Headless Fat Molded, and I'm actually deflecting their suicide bomb attack, and that seems very crazy. A lot of people don't realize you can do that, but you actually can, and I like the fact that you can do that, because it rewards skillful timing on the deflect, and it gives you a really good reward. You get no damage in the process. And it's a very risky method. I highly recommend that you just shoot them 3 times with the pistol, because that's the fastest and most efficient way to get rid of them. But if you're wanting to save up on ammo, just deflect them. It takes a lot of practice, but you will nail it down. The timing on the deflection is exactly the same as when you're trying to deflect the Fat Molded's running attack. It's the same case with the Mama Molded when I deflected her running attack. So try to sprint towards them if you want to gain more leniency when you're supposed to press the button. But this part right here, have a Ramrod equipped, crouch in this area over here once you pick up the key, and then kill this guy, because he will always try to readjust himself since I'm so close to him, and he will readjust in that direction, so I can easily prepare a Ramrod shot for him. And then right here, use the first explosive trap against the first Fast Molded, and then I recommend just using the pistol against this guy, because he likes to bounce off the walls, but because there isn't a second wall for him to bounce off of in order to continue the chain, he can't do his attack, and he's very keen on doing it. I normally just try to counter his jump attack, because it's very easy to counter with the knife, and on this DLC, since you can stomp, it makes my knife counter against the Fast Molded even more efficient. And I'm waiting for this White Molded over here to trigger all the traps, and then I'm going to run past him. There's going to be a Fast Molded on your right when you get through this door, so counter him with the knife. Make sure you close this door just in case the White Molded decides to come towards you. And then, there you go. And then use the key on this door over here. And can I just say, the inventory on this game is always going to be my favorite inventory system in the Resident Evil series. Not only does it not pause the game, so it allows you to manage your inventory while all these unskippable events are happening, and it benefits the speedrunning aspect, but you can pre-select where your cursor is going to be when you open the inventory, so that you're not fumbling around in the inventory so much. And it's so fast and so efficient. And a lot of people say that Resident Evil 7 is the slowest game in the series, but does it look like this is the slowest Resident Evil game ever? Whoever those people are who say Resident Evil 7 is the slowest Resident Evil game ever, screw them. Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake are slower than Resident Evil 7 because of how sluggish those games are. This game actually feels like it flows with how everything plays out, with how you're managing your inventory, with just going through doors, with just getting past all the enemies. Like, it really feels like there is a flow to this game that really stands out, and I really appreciate it with this game. But there's the Thor's Hammer. It's the shotgun of this game. I'm not a big fan of the Thor's Hammer because the spread is very random. and it's nowhere near as accurate as the shotgun from the main game. It's kind of annoying, but at the same time, it's still a very reliable tool because it does a lot of damage to the enemies. You can even initiate flinch animations using the shotgun on this game and set them up for a melee attack, which is helpful. But I remember when the first trailer for the DLC dropped, and so many people were hating the DLC because it was more action-oriented. Like, what is wrong with these people? This is not action-oriented. This is still survival horror. Like, I feel like I have to manage my ammo more on this game compared to the other Resident Evil games. Ammo on this DLC is critical. If you don't have grenades for a particular sequence, if you don't have enough ammo for one particular sequence, you are going to be done for. And at least on this game, the weapons actually matter, because of the fact that this DLC is not designed for knife only, and it's the same case with the main game and also for End of Zoe. It makes the experience a lot more demanding and a lot more challenging. The enemies are at their most lethal, deflection is highly encouraged to make sure that you stay alive, and managing your ammo is very important in this DLC, because there are sequences on this DLC where if you don't have enough ammo for those sequences, you are going to get screwed very easily. And all of that together compounds into a very challenging experience that really complements the survival horror aspect that they're going for. And just because you have a lot more options at your disposal when it comes to handling this DLC as a survival horror experience, it doesn't mean it's action-oriented. This is simply an alternative take on the survival horror aspect, but from the perspective of a character who has been through so much. Why would the gameplay not reflect that? Why would people want the gameplay to be very similar to what they've already experienced from the older Resident Evil games? It doesn't make any sense. When the developers give you a lot more options when it comes to dealing with the enemies have to increase in lethality as well. You know, that's why the inclusion of a dodge in Resident Evil 3 was very important, because it forced the developers to make the enemies a lot more unpredictable, it allowed them to create a lot more threatening enemies, and it provided a level of complexity to Resident Evil 3. And when that level of complexity is applied to those kind of Resident Evil games, it makes those Resident Evil games challenging, memorable, lethal, but fair at the same time. And that perfectly complements the survival horror aspect of the more action-oriented Resident Evil games. And I can't say the same with Resident Evil 2 Remake, unfortunately, because that game is so simplistically designed, and that whole entire game is designed for knife only, because the enemies are so simplistically designed. There's no kind of challenge to it whatsoever. If you were to do that whole entire game with the guns, you'd absolutely destroy it, because it's so simple. Doing that game knife only is really the only good way to play it, because it actually feels like you're being challenged. Even still, though, the holes of Resident Evil 2 Remake will come back to bite you in the knife-only run, because that game has a lot of problems, and if you haven't seen my walkthrough, you've got to check out all the problems that that game has. That's why I struggled so much on the laboratory section for Claire 1, because I was getting screwed too much by the game, and not because of my own mistakes. And I can't even consider Resident Evil 2 Remake legitimately difficult. It's just a very boring experience, whereas with this DLC, I can consider it legitimately difficult, because every single mistake has been my fault. And I really felt like I was going to have a heart attack by the end of this DLC, because I was panicking so much with trying to get this particular restriction done. And, by the way, right there, make sure you have the key selected on your inventory, and make sure you have the Neuro Stun Grenades equipped, so that you can stun that fast molded that comes after you. There will occasionally be two fast molded, but one Neuro Stun Grenade is enough to stun them. And then, once you've opened the door using the key, swap to your grenades. You need normal grenades for this boss fight against the Mama Molded. And this is a really cool fight right here, because we're going to be using Resident Evil 4 mechanics to our advantage. In Resident Evil 4, there was the mechanic of shooting enemies in the leg while they were running and they fall over. And that mechanic is with this boss fight. And I'm only going to use it once, because this boss, I've gotten a really good pattern for it. And the only time I'm going to get this boss to run is after I punch it once. So, in the beginning, shoot her with the ramrod so that she's open to being damaged to all of the weapons. Shoot her 8 times with the shotgun, and then punch her. Now what you're going to have to do is reload your shotgun, swap to your pistol, and she's always going to do the running attack if you stand over here. And because I shot her while she was getting up off the ground, this seems to trigger her to only do this particular attack. So shoot her in the leg, and then repeat the process of shooting her head 8 times, and then punch her. After you punch her, reload your shotgun, and then you need to swap to your grenades. You have to time your grenade throw, so that by the time the grenade detonates, she will be in a neutral state, and she will get stunned. Throw your grenade at the other leg that you haven't shot, and she will get stunned. Repeat the whole process of shooting her head 8 times, and then punch her. And while she is getting up off the ground, you have to shoot her head even more, using your remaining shotgun shells. And then after you use your remaining shotgun shells, swap to your pistol, and she will die. And that is the end of this boss fight. And isn't that quite a coincidence, how I used a Resident Evil 4 mechanic against a Resident Evil 7 boss, and then I had to shoot the boss 8 times, almost like it's an homage to Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 are the best Resident Evil games in my opinion, and then with the recent leaks for Resident Evil 8, they sound very promising, and I even heard that Resident Evil 8 is going to have gameplay similar to the Not a Hero DLC, and based on what you've seen so far, the gameplay for the Not a Hero DLC is astounding, and if Resident Evil 8 is going to have gameplay similar to that, then it means it's going to most likely be a good game. And I definitely think at the point where Resident Evil is right now, with Resident Evil 2 Remake being a disappointment, and then Resident Evil 3 Remake not being to everyone's taste, Resident Evil needs a sequel. I mean, there have been rumors that Resident Evil 8 is going to be releasing in 2021, which if it is, I'm going to be very excited for it, but if not, that's going to be quite a disappointment. For all I know, they might remake Code Veronica, and a Code Veronica remake would be interesting, but considering the direction they took Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake, it might not be the best. I mean, I have heard rumors that Resident Evil 4 is getting a remake in 2022, and why on earth would Capcom try to remake one of the best Resident Evil games ever made? If they remake Resident Evil 4, they will destroy everything that Shinji Mikami built with that game. Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential titles ever in the Resident Evil series because it not only changed survival horror, but it also influenced so many other games to come. It created the over-the-shoulder perspective, it introduced some of the best feedback I have ever seen on weapons, it had some really impressive enemy design philosophies, and so much more. And because of the fact that new Capcom seems to listen to their fans way too often, and they rely too much on a fan base that doesn't understand the very core pillars that define a Resident Evil game, they're going to likely mess up Resident Evil 4. And you might be thinking, why not just stick with the original version and not touch the remake? Well, let me reason with you guys. I cannot play Resident Evil 4 knowing that its remake is going to divide the fan base even more and most likely cause its loyal supporters to badmouth Resident Evil 4. That would be really bad for Resident Evil 4. But I'm gonna have to pause on this particular tangent right now because this is a really difficult fight coming up. So, this is the Shield Machine fight, and it is a fight against a horde of Molded. And on the first phase, there are just going to be a couple of normal Molded, and then once you've eliminated at least 3 or 4 Molded, there's going to be a Headless Fat Molded that will spawn in the back right corner. And I'm going to use a Ramrod in order to finish him off, because he can be pretty annoying if you don't finish him off very quickly. And there he is, and he's dead. Something very important that you need to note, you need to save at least 2 Ramrods for the last phase, so that you can get the last phase done very efficiently. So try your best to make sure that you're only using the Ramrods 3 times before the last phase, so that you can save 2 Ramrods for the final phase. But that is the end of the first phase, and for the next phase, you need to stand in this corner over here, because there's going to be a fast Molder that will bust out of the debris over there. And I'm going to use a shotgun in order to counter him rather than using the knife. Because 1, I don't want to take any risks, and 2, I need to stay in this corner here in order to delay the spawn. If you stand in the enemy's spawn point, they will not be able to spawn. The moment you move from that spot, they will decide to spawn. And I'm controlling this right now. And you need to have all of your grenades. You need 6 grenades, and throw all 6 of your grenades in order to get rid of most of the Molded. This is really the final part of the game where you need these hand grenades. The hand grenades are not going to be that helpful against the final boss fight or against any other enemy type. The incendiary grenades are going to more than make up for that. But now that I've gotten rid of most of the enemies, there's just that one fast Molded over there, and I'm just going to finish him off, and then there's going to be a white Molded right behind me, so I need to hit him, and I missed right there with my Ramrod shot, so that was very unfortunate. So now it means I have to be very careful when it comes to naming my shots for the last phase, and that is the end of the second phase. Now for the last phase, make sure you equip the Neuro Stun Grenades, and you've got to time your Neuro Stun Grenade so that you can stun both of these Fat Molded. So you'll see the second Fat Molded spawn out of the ground, while the first Fat Molded will just bust through the debris. The moment you see the second Fat Molded, throw your grenade, and then aim very carefully for their head, and they will die instantly from a Ramrod shot. And that is the end of this fight. It is pretty challenging. It took quite a while to practice this particular fight, but I managed to nail it. Something else I forgot to mention about this fight, don't try to go for the punches, just try to go for the stomps. The punches, while they do give you iframes, it will allow the enemies to get around you and just hit you off camera, so it'll put you in a pretty bad spot, and that's why I recommend you don't do the melee attacks unless you're absolutely sure that you can do the melee attack without any enemies getting the drop on you. And since we're on the topic of the melee system, there's something I actually forgot to mention about the melee. The stumble mechanic from Resident Evil 4, where when you knock an enemy into another enemy, they just get stumbled back. It is back in this game, only on this game, it's a lot better than Resident Evil 4, because the enemies will actually get knocked over if you punch one enemy into another, and this can be very helpful for setting up other enemies to get stomped. It's something that can be very helpful in this fight if you end up doing the melee. And I'm really glad that Capcom decided to take influences from Resident Evil 5, because Resident Evil 5 was the very first one where the stumble mechanic could actually knock over enemies like that. It's just following up with a stomp was almost impossible on professional difficulty, because the enemies recovered very fast from their knockdown animation whenever you knock them over on professional difficulty. But now that that's done, we are going to be able to gain access to the Connections Research Lab, and we are going to be dealing with a couple of baby molded that are easily dispatched by pistol shots. And there's going to be an opportunity to pick up a ramrod shot, and there's going to be a fat molded and also a couple of fast molded. The fat molded on this part has less health compared to the fat molded seen in the shield machine, and you can dispatch the two fast molded easily using the ramrod shots. It's just I ended up using up all of my ramrod shots because I missed one of my shots with the ramrods, and I was panicking because the fast molded were closing in on me. And I'm kind of glad that it turned out that way, because it meant I was going to fight Lucas with very few ramrod shots. Because in the final boss fight against Lucas, you get 4 ramrod shots. And I only ever used the ramrod shots on the first phase of Lucas, because it takes roughly 5 to 6 shots from your ramrods in order to put him into the next phase. And the rest of the fight can be done with incendiary grenades, deflecting, and the shotgun. And I haven't really had a lot of opportunities to use the normal pistol shots, which is so surprising. I pretty much only used the normal pistol rounds against the baby molded and just to disable one trap. But this is the part that has the 2 fast molded. There's one around the corner, and then there's another one directly ahead of me who spawned. And that's pretty helpful that he spawns in before I've even triggered the guy around the corner. It's just the other guy got triggered because I missed my ramrod shot, and I made noise. And that's why I ended up having to go back in here to cause the fast molded to despawn. And when I get back to this threshold over here, he's going to respawn. And you don't have to actually shoot this fast molded. Because you're in a narrow corridor, he's going to be very keen on trying to bounce off the walls, but that's only delaying him from attacking, so you're able to run past him. And once you've done that, he will not follow you because he will despawn when you reach this threshold of the area. And that is the last enemy before we have to take on Lucas in this rather difficult boss fight. So, I mentioned before in my Resident Evil 3 Remake walkthrough on Infernal difficulty that Final Nemesis on Infernal difficulty is harder than Lucas Baker. At the time, that is what I believed in. But now, I take back what I said previously in that walkthrough. Lucas Baker is way harder than Final Nemesis on Infernal difficulty for all of the right reasons. Like, Final Nemesis is a fun fight, but it has problems. The amount of hitbox issues he has, the kind of problems involving the pustules that just perfectly hit you with their stupid acid attack, it can be very bullcrap a lot of the times, and it doesn't have a lot to it to really make it feel like it's panic-inducing. Whereas with this fight, this was absolutely panic-inducing. This is the most skillful fight I've ever done in a Resident Evil game. It is so dependent upon your ability to deflect Lucas's attacks, and Lucas is incredibly aggressive. I mean, for the first phase, he isn't too bad, because there is a pattern to what he does. For the second phase, it isn't too bad, so long as you're being very aggressive on Lucas, and you're using incendiary grenades. Because one of the greatest aspects about Lucas in this boss fight is that so long as he is in a neutral animation, he will always take hit stun from the incendiary grenades. He will also take hit stun during his attack animations, so this can be very helpful in stopping Lucas from doing some of his more dangerous moves, like his jump attack, because you cannot deflect the jump attack, and even when he's in the air, it will always stop him if you use an incendiary grenade on him. And ramrods will also do the exact same effect. They will stun him, and you don't have to necessarily hit him in the head with a ramrod in order to stun him. You can hit him in his body as well, and it will work. But the main point of the second phase is to get him to expose his chest weak spot so that his behavior changes. And that change in the behavior will allow you to deal damage to him very efficiently in the second phase. I think Lucas only takes damage when he is being hit in his chest. I mean, I have seen my knife-only attempt on Lucas, and he did die rather quickly, even though I wasn't hitting his chest a lot. So maybe he is taking damage to his head, but it doesn't do a lot of damage. But for the third phase, it's practically the same thing you were doing in the second phase, only Lucas is a little bit more predictable because he's on his last legs. But here's the first phase of the fight. So Lucas is currently invulnerable during this animation where he has dropped down, and he's going to start attacking me. and he's going to do the jump attack every single time when you stand at this distance. So the pattern is as follows. He's going to do his jump attack. He's then going to do this big combo attack that covers some incredible range. He's going to swap between his arms as he's chasing you down. And then his next attack is going to be his instant kill grab attack, but if you deflect his grab attack, it will always expose his chest weak spot. So I have successfully deflected it, and now what you have to do is you need to inflict the damage equivalent of 5 to 6 ramrod shots on his chest so that you can get directly to the second phase. And that is the damage equivalent right there. So now what's happening is he's going to jump on top of this structure in the middle of the arena, and he's going to complain about head trauma, and he's going to undergo several mutations that will give him new abilities. And you need to make sure you stand in this spot so that Lucas will be on this side of the arena, because this side of the arena has a lot more room for you to back up, just in case he's closing in on you. But wait for Lucas to finish his animation, and then throw an incendiary grenade at him. So there we go, and during the stun animation, shoot him twice in the head, and then throw another incendiary grenade. And I'm just trying to readjust him right now so that he's facing me. And he's in an additional stun animation because I dealt additional damage to his head, and now his chest weak spot is exposed. And this is where it is very dependent upon your ability to deflect him. So if you stand at the right distance, when you expose his chest weak spot, he will always do the instant kill grab. But if you deflect it, you'll be able to stun him again and deal additional damage to him. You have to keep repeating this so that you can get to the third phase. And I'm standing at the right distance. He's going to do his grab, and I'm just going to repeat the process. I'll have to repeat this 2 more times before he decides to jump back onto that structure and start the third phase. I think he has more health upon first starting this fight, and then when you restart the checkpoint, he has less health. And it's strange, but it's not that big of a deal. In fact, this makes it a lot more intimidating, because I was panicking the whole time when I was doing this fight. I was so afraid of messing up the deflection, but I think at this point, I had already mastered the deflection timing so much that I just subconsciously knew when to press L1. It was absolutely incredible that I was able to nail this so much. You need an incredible amount of skill for this DLC if you want to succeed and actually do this whole entire DLC without taking any damage and without restarting the checkpoint. And here's the third phase. And I'm running low on oxygen, so I have to make my way over to this oxygen tank over here. He's going to roar, and he's then going to jump down. Be very careful when he jumps down. If he jumps near you, he's going to start an attack, but right there, he decided to jump far away from me. I'm going to readjust him, and I'm going to throw an incendiary grenade at him. Now, for this part right here, he's going to try to do the combo attack, but he's going to chain his instant kill attack into the combo attack if I stand at a very far distance away from him. And he just did his instant kill grab just then, but I countered him. Because the instant kill grab is way faster than before, so it'll make it a lot easier in order to predict when you're supposed to press L1. But he's recovered from the animation right now, so I'm going to use another incendiary grenade on him. I'm going to pump some additional shotgun shells into him, and because I'm standing right here and he's over there, he's going to jump up top of the structure, and one incendiary grenade will kill him. And in the famous last words of Ethan Winters, playtime's over! And that is it, folks. That is the end of this phenomenal DLC. This is a fantastic Resident Evil game. No other game can feel as epic as this. And I'm just going to let this final cutscene play out. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.
Game over. Finally.
Chris, the data transfer is almost complete.
How do I stop it?
You need to find a way to shut down the server. There may be some transformer relays you can... Okay, that worked. Gonna be some pissed computer techs up here, but...
From your river. What's the sit rep?
the facility is clear. Even the newer breeds have been neutralized.
Then I'm out of here.
Perimeter wall is up and operational.
Good. Think we did any good here?
Not for them, unfortunately. But the mold is contained. Hopefully, they're Evie's last victims.
Hopefully.
Chris, there's a call for you. You need to take it back at the camp.
All right. I'm on my way.